In a forgotten time,
like pre-1988.
musicians roam the earth freely, playing real guitars, drums, keyboards, and saxophones in their native habitat.
Then, without warning, these hard-working troubadours and minstrels were brought to near extinction by what is now known as the digital age.
Suddenly, drum machines, auto-tune, Pro Tools, and pre-recorded tracks dominated the musical landscape, ravaging both the live performance and recording scene.
A select few musical dinosaurs withstood this onslaught and have persevered, hoping to pass along the wisdom of the ages.
When Musicians Roam the Earth is here to offer practical, relevant, hard-hitting advice for musicians who are serious about their careers.
Welcome to
When Musicians Roam the Earth.
Okay, so here we are. We're back with part two of what we're calling Bridging the Generation Gap. What we talked about earlier, just to kind of catch you up a little bit, is the difference between older music and the newer music, and frankly, older people like me and some of the younger folk. Rather than talk about how different everything is, how do we get these folks together? How do we get to sit down and talk about this stuff? How do we make this fun for everybody? How do we get younger people to understand that there was so much great music in the past that maybe they should listen to it? How do we get older people to maybe understand that there's a lot of really talented young folks out there and they just need to kind of be open to it? These are the conversations that you can go long into the night sitting on a bar stool. Believe me, I know. I've done it many, many times. It's fun and it's invigorating. Sometimes it gets a little heated. But the idea is, how do we get from old to new? How do we get folks to realize that it's all music? And that's the point. Well, here's how we get them to realize that. You look them right in the eye and go, hey, it's all music. We shouldn't need more of an explanation than that. All music is good. It's all got, it's all rooted in good intention, right? No one's looking to outdo the other person. We're just all looking to make good music, to find good music, to listen to good music. I wanted to further some of the things that we said in the last episode. So, from the standpoint of the musical dinosaur, once again, we have the official hats and T-shirts here. The dinosaur with the musical note on it. As a musical dinosaur, I can't help but look at some of the what we now call classic rock music as just being some of the greatest music in the world. It had dynamics. It was played with passion. The lyrics meant something most of the time. There were those kind of drug-induced songs that I've been listening to for 50 years and still don't know what the hell they're talking about. But there was room for poetry. There was room for just being bombastic. And Keith Moon, once again, mentioning The Who, being the craziest drummer ever, loud, soaring guitar solos. And a lot of that isn't really present in today's music because a lot of today's music is synthetic. Now, here are the two sides to this coin. In the old days, we had real musicians playing real instruments. That's not always the case these days. Now, that's not my opinion. That's pretty much a fact. I mean, when it all comes down to it, you kind of have to just say drums are drums. If there was no drums in a studio being recorded on this record, that means there's no drums. That means it was a drum machine. That means it was a synthetic source somewhere, a synthesizer. Wherever it was not a guy hitting a snare drum. That will always kind of mystify a lot of us because we grew up with real instruments. Now, as we move through that, as I touched on earlier, when you go into an arena or a theater and you paid to see a band play live, are they really playing live? And if they're not playing live, what did you really pay for? I don't know if you'd call that false advertising. I do know a little bit about the law. I'm not a lawyer, but I've pretty much seen every episode of Matlock at least twice, so I'm kind of an authority. The idea is if you go and there's someone on stage who makes believe they're singing, are they lying to you? Are they cheating? Did you get your money's worth? Well, here is the part that's that question has been answered for me a couple of times by some of my younger friends. They say they don't care. They say they don't care that the people aren't really singing or that we're hearing a violin section when there's no violins on stage. So we have to move on from that topic into the next one. And the fact is this. If you know that, and if you're willing to pay for it, that's great. I don't know that that diminishes the entertainment value. I think when you go to that concert, you have a great time. Everybody's up, everybody's singing and dancing, and that's great. So that would be the result. I would say across the board, older folk, younger folk, whomever, if the result is everybody's singing and clapping and dancing, well, how bad could it be? You know, I don't want to make too big a deal out of it because it is a topic that I've come across almost daily in my life where I'm talking to someone younger and they talk about synthetic versus real, and sometimes the lines get blurred. But the fact is, I think we need to stop looking at the differences and maybe look at some of the commonality. I think it would be great for some of the older folk to really open up their hearts and their minds as well as their eyes and their ears and realize that there's some good music out there by some younger people. They're a little harder to find because we don't have terrestrial radio like we used to have. Now, that was another thing. We used to get in the car and there were 6 or 7 radio stations. Now you have 500. You don't have DJs anymore. You have robots running the station. It's a little tougher to zone in on what we used to call top 40, what we used to call hit radio. So you have to look a little bit. Now, the answer to that, for the old folks such as myself, we do have this thing called a computer, what I sometimes call the magic lightning box, because I have no idea what it does half the time. I kind of push buttons until something goes wrong, and then I call someone who's 30 years younger to fix it for me. But the idea of using the computer to search the internet and find some of these bands and find some of these modes of music, you don't even have to know the name of the band, right? You just punch in something that says, hey, what's some new music with a horn section? What's some new blues artist? And it gives everything you want. So the older generation, the means are there. You know, if you're willing to look a little bit, you're going to find a lot of great music. Now, I'm going to dovetail into something a little more personal once again. I took the time to do a little research as to how I might want to proceed with this podcast. And one of the things I did was I went to a couple of fan sites. Now, most of you might know I had the tremendous honor of playing bass for Neil Diamond for several years. We did a couple of tours, and I was fortunate enough to be included on a few of the records. So I went to Neil's fans, and I said, hey, I'm doing this thing. What do you folks want to hear about? What do you want to talk about? And they responded, incredibly responded. You know, they flooded me with responses. So I want to do them the service of saying hello to all of them. And thank you for being so supportive. They wanted to know about what I did, you know, my experiences on the road with Neil Diamond. So I'll give you a couple of hints about that. Number one, there was never even anything close to a bad experience. It was all incredible, and I do mean incredible. Now, the way I want to dovetail my experience on the road with Neil Diamond into today's episode is this. We played a lot of music from the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, and then some of the 90s music. And actually, my first tour with Neil Diamond was to promote the record that came out in 2014, which was called Melody Road. So we covered a lot of ground. We covered whatever that was, 5 decades 60, 70, 80, 90, actually 6 decades, right? I had to count on my fingers. Did you see that? Isn't that awful? You young guys would have probably had a calculator in your phone, but I use these. So playing all that music with someone like Neil, it was all live on stage. We had a live horn section. We had background singers. We had percussion and drums. We didn't have any pre-recorded stuff. It's as simple as that. When I hearken back to the other conversation in the other episode talking about you're looking at, a singer and a drummer on stage and you're hearing an orchestra and you're hearing a choir. Well, obviously they're not on stage. It's obvious that that is synthetic. It's obvious that that's pre-recorded. We didn't do any of that. We had everything self-contained, and it was a great feeling. And we knew that a lot of other bands out there were not doing that. Now, there's no judgment here, but I do feel the need to say that we kind of stood our ground on that one, and we were one of the few bands that really went out and just knocked it out live every night. And you know what? When the bass player, me, made a mistake, you heard it. It's just that simple because it was live. That is part of live music. Part of it is the anxiety of the band. Part of it is the energy of the individual. Part of it is the, that kind of arc between the audience and the performers on stage. Wow, are they going to hit that high note? Oh, on the record, they did that other thing where the guitar solo was amazing. Is he going to duplicate that live? Are they going to try a different treatment of the song that maybe isn't exactly like the record? This was all the stuff that went into real live performance, meaning if the guitar player broke a string, well, we had to work around it, right? So I want to try to kind of, continue this thread of talking about the generation gap between old folks and young folks and their music, and sometimes they seem to be on a collision course with each other, but it doesn't have to be. Trying to educate both sides about what really happened in music 40 years ago versus what happens now. Trying to make people aware of the fact that there's so much great music, old and new, that we should all take advantage of it. And when I pull that all together into my own personal experience and talk about some of the feedback I've gotten in emails and Facebook notes and things about people asking me about my personal experience. Well, playing with Neil was, without a doubt, the greatest experience from a career standpoint. But personally, every single night was the greatest experience. Every night you went out and this guy played these hits that spanned all this time, and we did it all for reals, yo, as all my younger friends would say and now make fun of me for trying to pull that off, which I did not on camera, but you know what I'm saying. The idea is we really did it. I would encourage any young bands to try to do what we did. Do what you do and do it the best you can do it without a laptop on stage. Try it without drum machines. Try it without playback. I'd be really interested to see what you came up with. I wonder if sometimes you're not selling yourself a little short by using all the tricks that we have available to us. No one's saying it's wrong, but I would like to see some of the younger folks blossom as songwriters, as singers, and as players, and pull it all together in kind of like in one package on stage without using the technology and the synthetic stuff. I think what would happen is you'd probably find a little more of your soul in these songs. So if I were to, again, try to draw a thread through this entire conversation, because it does go to the left and the right. It does kind of, snake around a little bit. But the idea of a lot of people can really appreciate your talent when you show us your talent as opposed to showing us 20% of you and 80% of of synthetic stuff on stage. I think a lot of audiences would look to you as really being something special if you could just go out there and do it as a band. Now, the ultimate is to walk out on stage with either an acoustic piano or an acoustic guitar and just play by yourself. That is incredible. If you ever took the ultimate step of just taking that guitar or piano and singing your own material. Now think about that. Think about that for a second. Just take the zoom lens and take everything we just talked about, right? We're talking about all these years of all these different styles of music, and it used to be real, and it used to be real horns and real violins, and now some of that's synthetic, and go on, and who's misunderstanding you, and all that kind of stuff. Who doesn't know who's playing on stage because you can't tell if they're lip syncing or not. Take all that stuff, and now you boil it down to the absolute simplest and purest form. A person, a musician, sitting there with a piano or an acoustic guitar, playing songs that you wrote. That is as simple and as pure, and maybe most importantly, as real as it gets. So when you do that, you have dispelled any notions of, oh, he's not that good, or he can't duplicate what's on the record, or, in the old days we used to do it this way. You forget about all that nonsense. You answer all the questions. You shut up all your critics. You probably bring yourself to a higher level, and you just do it right there. That is the purest form of expression. So just to kind of wrap this up, when you take the generation gap that I started with, way back when, there were guys who could just sit there and play the piano and sing. And technology took it to recording, which made it, well, I'll add some other players and maybe I'll add a couple of guitar tracks. And then that went to the digital world and the virtual world, where suddenly you could record 500 guitars on the same track. And then we took that and brought it to the stage and made it live, where suddenly all the stuff you could do in the recording studio, you could now do on stage. But if we take that entire thing and boil it back down, almost like the circle of life, so to speak, we come all the way back. Sitting with your instrument and playing songs you wrote will answer all these questions. That would bridge the gap. That would make anyone from 10 years old to 110 years old understand that this is the purest form of music, and what you have to offer is great. So give that a shot once in a while and get back to me.
Be sure to like us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram and Twitter, and you can reach us at whenmusiciansroamtheearth@gmail.com.
And you can check out all of our podcasts on billsinkay.com and grooveprogram.com. Thanks for listening to
When Musicians Roam the Earth.